Well, good morning. You guys all made it here. We made it through the snowstorm. We're here. We're without heat at our house, so it's nice to be in a warm building. Yeah, we're without heat, without hot water. So we'll. Yeah. You know, when you don't pay the bill, that's what happens. I kept telling Georgia they're going to cut it off unless you pay this, and she said, "No, I want to save money."
Just flip that over. You've got the exact truth. Yeah, well, I have an idea. He's going to lose it on the repair.
Yeah, I think he is having a guy come out Christmas Eve to fix your furnace. Yeah, I left my son with a blank check. All right.
Whoa.
Yeah, he is. Hawaii is where he headed. All right. Today, I want to use the Christmas story to illustrate how we read the Bible incorrectly. So we've been talking a lot when we've been looking at Matthew here, we've been saying, you know, there's 4 Gospels. And we understand that they're written because they're not written to be a biography. In any way, they're not biography. We should read them as story. And our default way of reading should be as story. So when we read them, though, and I don't mean an untrue story, I mean a story like tell me the story of Jesus. But they're not meant to be biographies. Matthew has his own point of view. Luke has his own point of view. And we can illustrate that perfectly today with what we call the Christmas story. Because I will tell you that the Christmas story is totally and completely fouled up. All right? Now, the first thing you notice when you read the Gospels is that only 2 of the 4 Gospels even include anything about the birth of Jesus. Mark says nothing about it. Jesus just appears. John says something, but he doesn't really describe it as the birth, right? Because when John starts out, his point is, where is Jesus from? He's from God. That's all you need to know. So you don't need to know anything about how Jesus was born. In fact, when you look at it honestly, other than the fact that Jesus is born, does it really matter to your faith? You know, it might if you were a Jew and you had to follow your line through Jesus. It might if you were living in a time of a powerful Caesar. Therefore, Luke, who's talking to mainly the Gentiles, and his gospel is really addressed to them, spends a lot of time, and you know how he describes the birth? Well, let's get some things. I'll tell you whether they're in Luke or whether they're in Matthew, okay? Tell me one thing that you hear in the Christmas story.
The shepherds.
Shepherds. Okay, you get shepherds. That's only in Luke. In fact, when you read Matthew and Luke, they're entirely different stories. They don't go together at all. But what we do is we try to slide them together and mash them together, and we make a mashed potatoes gospel. We conflate them instead of comparing them. All right, so here's what Luke does. Luke has shepherds. Indeed, where are the shepherds? They are out in the fields. Who talks to them? Angels talk to them and announce the birth of Jesus, right? So angels talk to them and announce the birth. You know why Luke has that? You know why Luke would be especially motivated to include that in his story of Jesus?
Because he was a physician. He was very careful about what he wrote. He wrote down exactly what he saw. And Matthew is a tax collector, so who would believe him?
Well, of course, so Luke didn't see this. Well, yeah, no, nobody's going to believe Matthew. But, of course, Luke didn't see this. In fact, Luke tells you, I didn't see any of this stuff, right? Luke tells you, he says, I'm trying to write what I gleaned from other people. Well, why would Luke could say, well, I'm trying to be careful. But Luke is talking to Gentiles. They're living in a Roman world. When the Romans described the birth of Caesar, who announced it? Angels.
The birth of Caesar?
The birth of Caesar, when the Romans announced the birth of a new Caesar, they announced it with angels. Did you know that?
Oh.
Now that, they believed a Roman emperor was announced from the heavens on high through angels to the people. And you can read their accounts of when a new Caesar is born. So why does Luke describe the birth in this way? Because he's saying Jesus is the king, not Caesar. So I'm going to tell you it's exactly like Caesar's birth, only you get a real king this time, not a fake king.
You get real angels.
And you get real angels this time, not fake angels. And you get a real God and not a fake God. Are we getting kind of the picture of why this is important to Luke? He's talking to a group of people who think that Caesar is God. What has Luke got to convince them of?
That he's not.
Caesar is not God. I'm going to tell you about the birth of a real God, which was announced by real angels, not those fake angels.
And he came to ordinary people, not just.
He came to ordinary people. He announced it to them. It was known throughout the world, just like an announcement of a new birth of a Caesar. And he came to ordinary people like you and I. Luke concentrates on that because Luke's gospel, as you read Luke's gospel, it is really talking about how Jesus is the new David. Does this make any sense?
Is that why the angels, when Jesus was resurrected, were there to tell their story?
I think that's why the angels were there at the resurrection too. And of course, to me, the resurrection, which is included in some form in all four Gospels, has to be included. You can tell the story of Jesus without talking about his birth, but you can't tell the story of Jesus without talking about his resurrection. Now, to John, Jesus comes from God. To Luke, Jesus is the new David because he comes as a king. And that's how you announced a king, and that's how Jesus was announced in a kingly way. Okay, give me something else in the birth story. We're having fun now.
Stable.
A stable. Stable is only in Luke, because that's where the shepherds go. They go and find Jesus in a stable. Actually, in Matthew, where do they find him? At a house. You don't believe it? You can read the story. We have heard this story so long that we've messed it up. Why did God tell it two different ways? Because he wanted us to know it two different ways. He didn't want us to conflate it together and make some confused story. The shepherds appear in the manger. I'll call them wise men, the Magi, appear at a house. Give me something else you're familiar with in the story. I told you I was going to ruin your Christmas.
The wise men, the three wise men.
Okay, the wise men and the three wise men. Well, of course, the Bible doesn't say anything about three. There are three gifts. And although it calls them wise men, a better term is magi, and a better term is astrologer.
Right.
Astrologer. Now, those of you who know anything about me know that I taught astronomy for 31 years. So I know something about astronomy. I know nothing about astrology. Well, what is the difference between an astrologer and an astronomer?
Zodiac.
We both look at the sky. The zodiac is very important to me. You know why the zodiac is important? The 12 signs of the zodiac. You know why, of course, there's 12. It's where the sun goes through those constellations sometime during the year. So those we view as special constellations because the sun moves through those constellations. There's 88 constellations known.
But astronomy doesn't give special meaning to those constellations.
Exactly. We do not give any special meaning to, say, an Aries, although I know that people who are born of Aries are exceptional.
You got that right.
See what I mean? An astrologer attaches meaning to that path. Or a fortune teller, yeah, kind of things like that. But an astronomer says it's one of the constellations. That's how I locate myself in the sky. When I go out at night, I look up and I go, oh, I can see the altitude of the North Star tonight is about 40 degrees. I must be in Denver because the altitude of the North Star above the horizon is the same as my latitude on Earth. When I travel to Costa Rica, the North Star is almost on the horizon because my latitude is getting close to zero. If you go to the North Pole, the North Star is right above your head because you're north. So simple and I make it so hard. So an astrologer attaches special meaning. Now, do you know where we get the names of our constellations from? Actually, not the Romans. The Romans weren't very good astrologers, and the Greeks were not very good astrologers. They borrowed names. Who were they?
Phoenicians or Iranians or something.
Well, we're getting close. Phoenicians or Iranians. The Phoenicians, not sort of. The best astronomers of that time, and our constellation names came from the Babylonians. Now, the Babylonians saw things in the sky. Let's face it. They didn't have TV in those days. 3,000 years ago, when the Babylonians went to bed at night, they went to bed when it got dark. Because they had no way to stay up. I mean, they could build a little fire and stick around a little longer. And then you know what they did for entertainment? They would lay down and look up at the sky, and they would go, man, do you see that out there? Doesn't that look like a hunter to you chasing a dog? And you go, which ones? You know, those three stars kind of making that shape up there. Don't they look like a hunter chasing a dog to you? And that one out there, doesn't he look like a big bear? I'm going to call him Ursa Major. And doesn't that one there look like a little bear? That's Ursa Minor. And then doesn't that one out there, Pisces, doesn't he look like a fish? I'm going to call it Pisces. Because that's fish.
They must have had a couple of drinks when they
Georgia's... They did, because you realize that one of the things, about the only thing that they could drink consistently throughout the year without getting really sick was something with alcohol. So we recognize that these people were drinkers and they laid around looking at the stars. And they looked at them all and they named them all. They even, you know what they even did? They even got together and they said, how many stars are there? And they would count them. Now, do you know how many stars that you can see on a very dark night, the darkest night you can imagine? About 4,000. How many stars are there? Gazillion. Gazillion stars. There are more than you could possibly count, but they're so dim that you can't see them. You can only see the brightest ones, and astronomers rank those, and it's the brightest ones that form our constellations that we know today. So we know things like there's a Queen, there's Cassiopeia, there's Orion, he's a hunter. There's the Big Dipper, which is Ursa Major. So what we got all these stars, and they name them all. Then, you know, because they were astrologers and not astronomers, they attached special meaning to them. Now, what do you suppose? Now, let's get this straight. Where is Babylon today? Close to Baghdad, about 20 miles outside of Baghdad. So these guys are Iraqis. Got it? The Iraqis, which also have a Persian influence to them, which are Iranians. We don't call them Persians anymore, we call them Iranians. I got to be politically correct, right? They're Iranians. So it's not the Persian Gulf anymore, it's the Iranian Gulf. Okay. Now, we get all this and we say, okay, they're coming from Baghdad and there are some men bearing gifts. Now, the Bible never says there are 3 men. It does say, however, there are 3 gifts. So our conflation says there were 3 wise men. They were wise because they were astrologers. They could see things in the constellations. Tell me what else you know about the Christmas story. Oh, the bright star. Now, the bright star is very interesting, isn't it? Because, do you notice, and we'll read it in a minute. Do you notice that who can see the bright star? It's never called, you know, what it's called is it's called a star, and we flip it to a bright star. But, you know, nobody else could see the star except for the astrologers.
Well, that makes sense, because if everybody could see it, they'd all be following the star.
They'd all be there outside Bethlehem, and it would be like somebody had a rave. Yeah, outside Bethlehem.
How would people know what the star was telling?
Okay, the star. How does an astrologer know this?
If the star is so far away, how could you possibly find a spot on the ground?
Okay, let me explain this to you. Remember, only the astrologers even see this thing. And our word that's translated star in the Bible could as easily be translated constellation. Now, let's go ahead to Matthew. I'm not going to read the account in Luke because it has no bearing on what we're doing. Well, I'll mention it later. But honestly, Matthew is the version of the birth story we're going to deal with today, because I want to figure out what the star is. Let's go to Matthew chapter 2. So let's just read this account for what it says, and you'll see that your ideas are mainly wrong. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judah, during the time of King Herod, there are actually 4 Herods mentioned in the Bible. This is the first King Herod. You know when this King Herod dies? He dies in 4 BC. So we have well-documented evidence that King Herod dies in 4 BC. It's okay. Yeah, that is a problem. Don't worry, we'll get through that. Magi, astrologers, from the east came to Jerusalem. Do you have a little problem with that statement? Oh, let me get this here. Here is Jerusalem. Here is Baghdad. I am in, this is east, this is west. If I'm in Jerusalem, I look to the east to Baghdad, right? Now if I'm in Baghdad and it says, wise men came from the east, came to Jerusalem, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. Let's just think about this for a minute. If you're already in the east and you see a star in the east and you think that was some kind of bright object they followed, you have a significant problem with the Bible. Because if you see a star in the east and you wanted to follow a bright object, you'd be going this way. And you would have discovered that the world is round before Columbus did. Right? If you're going to end up in Jerusalem, that is a long way to Jerusalem. It's already a months journey, several months journey to go from Baghdad to Jerusalem. But to get from Baghdad to Jerusalem, you have to go west, young man, just like Horace Greeley. Also, notice what they do. When they come, they go to Jerusalem. They don't go to Bethlehem right away, do they? And they say, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? Now, wait a minute. They're asking, where do I go from here? Right? Where is he? Now, they know he's a King of the Jews. Let's continue reading the story, then I'll straighten this out for you. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed. Why is he disturbed? Because he's the king. He doesn't want anybody else intruding on him. He's got enough problems. And all Jerusalem with him. Well, I don't know if it was all Jerusalem, but all the important people of Jerusalem, right? The king and all his buddies were pretty upset by this. Because if the king loses his job, we lose our job too. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. Herod didn't know. Actually, this is kind of a dig at Herod by Matthew. Why is it a dig at Herod? Well, because Herod, by the Jews, although we consider him a Jew, the Jews didn't consider Herod a Jew. Because what was Herod? He was a Roman collaborator. He was also from the wrong Jewish tribe, right? Now who would you define as a Jew? Well, a son of Judah, which is where the name Jew is going to come from, a shortening of it. You might even go back to Abraham, right? And say, sons of Abraham are Jews, but we know sons of Abraham aren't Jews. But Judah had a brother, didn't he? His favorite brother? No, sorry, not Judah. Jacob had a brother. Jacob, who is renamed Israel, has a brother. What's his name? Esau. The people from Esau's descendants settled south of where the Israelites, where the Jacobites settled. The Israelites settled north, and below them, in a land that in New Testament times is called Edom, is where they settled. Herod was an Edomite. Now, he considered himself a Jew. And he went to Rome and said, look, I can keep these guys in check, appoint me king of Judah. And the Roman emperor, not wishing to have any problems, said, okay, you got it. But he's an Edomite. The Jews hated him. Now, we actually call him Herod the Great. Why was he so great? Because he built everything back in Jerusalem. He especially, to the Jewish people, the important thing he built was the temple. So we've got this Herod, but he has to call together his chief priests and ask them why, because he doesn't know the Jewish law. So he gets all these guys together and they have to explain. Well, here's where the Christ is to be born. And they give you the quote from the prophecy, verse 7, then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. Oh man, the exact time the star had appeared. This tells you that nobody else could see it except for the wise men. Why is Herod asking him, when did the star appear? He could have gone outside at night, right? He could have asked his own guys. They weren't good enough astrologers to know. These astrologers, maybe 2, maybe 20, I kind of think it was 5 or 10 of them, have traveled from the east and come, and now he's asking them, when did the star appear? And he says, go make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so I can go and worship him. After they had heard the king, they went their way. The star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. They saw the star. They were overjoyed. On coming to the house, notice, not the manger, they saw the child with his mother Mary. They bowed down and worshiped him. They opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and incense and myrrh, and having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, take the child and his mother, escape to Egypt, stay there till I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child and kill him. So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so it was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, out of Egypt I have called my son. When Herod realized he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. He gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. Now, you should notice some very close parallels in this story to another story in the Bible. Remember, although Luke is interested in making this David 2.0, who is Matthew concentrating on when he talks to the Jews? He's trying to tell the Jews Jesus is Moses 2.0. Now tell me about Moses. Let's see, what things do we see that are similar in this story and in the birth of Moses? Why was Moses put in the bulrushes? Because they were killing the boys. Where did Moses come out from? Where did he lead the people from? From Egypt. In fact, the quote that you see from the Old Testament is exactly a quote out of Egypt I will call my son. When you take it in the context, it's his son, Israel, that he's called out of Egypt. That's God talking in that quotation. What else do you see as parallels? When Moses leads the people out, what does he follow? A pillar of fire. Man, there's a bright light in both, aren't there? Now, if you're not really following me, tracking me on Matthew with this, I'll give you something else to ponder in your mind. If you go back to Matthew chapter 1, and you go a record of the genealogy of Jesus, you know that word genealogy that's translated there? You know what it's from? The word Genesis. Now, who did the Jews believe wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament? Moses. Let me tell you about the genesis of Jesus, because he's like Moses. And when Matthew writes his book, not an easy thing, by the way, to write, how many teaching sections does he have? 5. Remember, we talked about the 5 teaching sections in Matthew. How many books are attributed to Moses? 5. We beginning to see the picture? To the Jew reading this, the parallels are jumping out of their brains. They're going, oh, we're going to talk Genesis. We're talking Moses. And then he comes out of Egypt, and they're following a light somehow is connected with this. And wow, the babies are going to be killed, and that's just like Moses, the way he was saved. To the Jew reading this, it has great meaning because they see Moses in this, which is exactly what Matthew wants. Why does he want the Jews to believe Jesus is the new Moses? These are Jewish Christians. He's writing in 80 AD. What's happened to those Christians? What's happened to those Jewish Christians? They've lost the temple. They've lost their heritage. If somebody came to me and said, Kim, I got to tell you, you're not Italian, I would lose my heritage. I would lose my heritage. I'd lose my identity. I mean, when I first met Georgia, that was my line. I'm an Italian lover.
On a Scottish pocket.
The other half of me is Scottish, so I always told her I'm an Italian lover on a Scottish pocketbook. So that she'd understand exactly what was going on, because half of me is Scottish. But if I lost my identity, I would be searching around and going, what is my purpose in the world? Have I believed that I was Italian all these years? Have I believed in the greatness of the Caesars, the power of the Italian people, the creators of all good art? Have I believed in this for naught? And you would say, no, you haven't believed in that for naught. All the great artists are Italian. All the great poets are Italian. All the great operas are Italian. All the great music is Italian. You haven't lost your heritage, because you know what? Italy is in a renaissance. And you are the new Italy. Wow. The Jews believe that they have lost their cultural identity. And their cultural identity was expressed in Moses. All their lives, they had been following Moses. What Matthew is doing to them is saying, I am giving you a better Moses. a Moses that has mercy combined with law. That's what he's trying to tell these people. So now we got to straighten out, indeed, what was the star. And I thought you'd actually like to see the star today. I'm going to show you the actual Star of Bethlehem. The word star in this account means constellation. The Babylonians are astrologers. To every constellation in the zodiac, they ascribe certain meanings. Just like we might today if you're reading a horoscope. The one constellation to which they assigned Israel was the fish, which is Pisces. Why would they assign Israel to be Pisces? Because it sits on the Mediterranean Sea, and it is obviously a place of fishing. In fact, who were most of Jesus' disciples? They were fishermen, not in the Mediterranean Sea, but in the Sea of Galilee. To the Babylonian astrologer, anything going on in Pisces means it's happening in Israel. All right, so now I know it's happening in Israel. Now I need to look for something happening astronomically before Herod dies. Now Herod dies in 4 BC. I told you I'd straighten that out. Who decided what is BC? Who ever invented this calendar? The Italians. Perfect. Perfecto. Actually not. Sadly, another one of my close relatives, but not an Italian, a Romanian monk. A Romanian monk. I'm very closely related to the Romanians too. A Romanian monk did this in about 420 AD. He said, we need a calendar that instead of dating from the birth of the latest Caesar, which is the way they were dating their calendars then, dated from the time of Christ. And so he says, I want Christ's birth to be in the year 1, and I want to count from there. There is no 0, by the way, in this calendar. They hadn't invented 0 yet. So there's no 0. You go from -1 to 1. So this monk says, I want it to be in the year 1. But you know what? He fouled it up. Actually, the monk had other ulterior motives. Do you know why the monk really wanted to straighten it out? Because the year 500 was coming. And the year 500 was a very important year because the Jews believed that the world would end at 5,000 years old. They believed that the birth of Christ, they believed the beginning of the world was 4,500 BC. So you get to 4,500 to 1 BC, if he could put the birth of Christ there, then when is the world going to end for them? 500 AD. So there was a big movement that said the world's going to end in 500. This monk said the world is not going to end in 500. You people need to relax. You don't need to change all your computers or fix everything. The world's not going to end in 500. You're mistaken. I'm going to have a new calendar, and we're going to follow this. And he really encouraged people to follow what not many people did, but it finally got wide-scale adoption. But he had fixed the birth of Christ in 1 AD. Well, he was wrong, because he didn't know what we know now. We have records, all kinds of historical records that we can date with other events, that Herod died in 4 BC. Since Herod died in 4, that means Jesus had to be born before 4 BC. Now you say, why 6? Why would you immediately go 2 years back? Because Herod had all the children under 2 killed because he wanted to be sure. So you need to go at least back to 6 and maybe into 7, because it even says that they didn't return from Egypt, right? We don't know how long they were in Egypt. but they didn't return from Egypt until after Herod had died. So that means you got to go back to 7. So now what I did is I took an astronomy program available to astronomers. Astrologers don't,
Italian.
and Italians, who invented it. And I said, let's go back to this time of about 7 BC and look for anything. Were there any comets? No. Were there any supernovas? No. Now, how do I know this? Because although the Israelites were not very good astronomers, you know who was good? The Chinese were exceptional astronomers. Also, the Babylonians. The Babylonians, and we have all kinds of Babylonian records that tell the same thing. So none of those record anything exceptional happening between 4 BC and 8 BC. There's no bright stars, there's no comets that you can see, there's just nothing going on. But then I said, well, wait a minute, if Pisces is where they saw it, that means they saw something happening in the east in Pisces. So I go, okay, Israel is Pisces, the fish. What's happening in the fish in about 7 BC? Well, can we turn out the lights? Ah, yes, okay. That's where I was when I learned I wasn't Italian.
That where you're Scottish?
Yeah. You know, in the United States Navy, we put USS on our ship, United States ship. In the British Navy, they put HMS, Her Majesty's ship. You know what the Italians put on theirs?
That's my boat.
AMB, that's my boat. Oh, come on. Oh, there we are. Okay. Now, let's look at 2 hours before sunrise, 7 BC, and what you see is that Jupiter and Saturn, Jupiter is here, and Saturn is here, and they're in the east. Now you go to May 25th. Jupiter and Saturn reappear. Well, they're sitting there right next to each other, right in Pisces. Then they start to get farther apart. I guess I should talk about this a little bit. I'd like to talk about it. Okay. Planets, the word planet means wanderer. We know a planet because they wander among the other stars. So whereas Pisces is a fixed constellation, the stars are always in the same places, planets wander among those. And if you look at Jupiter and Saturn during this time period, you'll see that Jupiter and Saturn are wandering around in the constellation. And they appear to they go one way and then they go the other way. It's like they're going forward and backward. And you say, well, how is that happening? How can a planet go backwards and forwards? And you go, and this is one of the craziest things I've ever heard. Well, they go backwards and forwards because if you think of this as the sun, you're on a moving platform, the Earth. You're looking out at stars. So as the Earth moves around the sun, you're looking at different groups of stars. And as you're moving, you want to be another planet for me?
Oh, sure.
Okay. I'll let you be Jupiter. Okay, now Jupiter, come on up here. Okay, the sun's the projector. I'm Earth, he's Jupiter. Now Jupiter is farther out than I am. You're farther out, you're way out. Okay, you're right there. Big Jupiter. As I'm going around the sun, you notice that Jupiter appears to me, Jupiter's moving very slowly that way. Very, very slowly, very slowly. I'm moving faster. Notice Jupiter is moving that way to me, and now he's moving that way to me because I'm passing him. Okay, thank you.
Great job.
So it's going, the planets are weaving around like this, but they're having their game in Pisces. How often does this happen? For Jupiter and Saturn to be in Pisces, it only happens every 230 years. So the astrologers see something they have never seen in their lifetimes, their father's lifetimes, or their grandfather's lifetimes. They see the most powerful and the second most powerful together in Israel. Got it? So they see the powerful and the most powerful together. I'm going to try to back this up. Okay, here we go.
Cross.
They can cross. They don't quite cross here. Yeah, you'll see that they do get close together, but so I'm now going to face east. It's just before sunrise. It's 7 BC. Look at Jupiter and Saturn. Now I'm going to let it move. Saturn comes up. It comes close to Jupiter all the time in Pisces. And then it stops and moves farther away. That date, where they stop, is about May 25th. So what do we have? To the astrologer, for the first time in their lifetimes or anybody they're familiar with, they see the greatest power and a secondary power together in the house of Israel. That's when the star first appears. Now, this is right before sunrise, so what direction are they facing? They're facing the east. We saw his star in the east because it was at sunrise. Now, how did they know to go to Israel? Because Pisces is Israel, and they know, you know this. If you, well, maybe you don't. I don't know how many you lay out at night and look at stars.
Well, first of all, by sunrise, Pisces would be in the west. So it would travel over all night long, and in the morning they would see it in the west, which is where Israel.
Yeah, so well, what's happening though is if you see a star in the east, it means the sun is coming up right after them. Okay, so the sun is about here. That's why you don't see any other stars in this, because I've got the sunrise happening. And this is from Baghdad, by the way. So that's a view from Baghdad in 7 BC of exactly what the sky looks like. Now we understand that because the earth is rotating, everything rises in the east and sets in the west. So if you were actually going to try to follow something that was in the east, and you were really going to go east, you'd go east for half the night, and then you'd go west for half the night, and you'd lead a fruitless existence. Kind of like most astrologers. That's when his star appears. Now what do they do? Well, they sit around and they think about that a little bit, and they go, I don't know, what do you think? Well, I think something's going on. You think something's going on that's important? Yeah, I think it is. Well, then it disappears into the glare of the sun, and when they appear, they are going to reappear in the evening sky. So now about September 9th to December 31st, now they're in the evening sky, just starting in the east, but very quickly it's getting darker at night now. Notice how close Jupiter and Saturn are getting. And then right about, and we're still in Pisces, they're almost touching each other. And on that date, we're looking at, wow, on that date we were looking about September 10th. All right, now let's continue. Now let's get to Jerusalem. Now an amazing thing happens. Another planet, David, because he's the god of war, which the Babylonians, we're now in Jerusalem, we're in February 13th of 6 BC. Mars has joined them. David has joined the king and the assistant in Pisces. That is when they see it in Bethlehem, because they know to go to the Bethlehem home of David. So when they say the star is over Bethlehem, it just means David appeared in the sky. So what do you have?
Hang on a second, I'm not following that.
Okay.
The star's name was David?
No, the star's name, the Babylonians associated David as the symbol of kingly power.
Babylonians?
The Babylonians knew that David was the great king of Israel.
Okay, but the other planet was Mars.
The planet's name is Mars, but they associated the god of war when he's in Israel. Mars is the god of war. So they associated Mars, because it's the red planet, they associated that always with war. And because it was war and it was in Israel, they knew it was David. Yep.
War or warrior?
Warrior, yes.
Yeah, but I think there's one flaw. Sorry to bring this up, but the illustration you show is visible by everyone, including Herod.
But nobody, it's like you guys. How many of you know what the interpretation is?
Nobody knew what the interpretation.
Except for the astrologers. Exactly my point. So it's visible to everyone, but only the astrologers know. They're the only ones who show up because and they go to a house. So they go to the house where Jesus is. Mm-hmm.
Could the Magi have read Daniel 9, where
The-
it talks about the 77?
Well, the Magi were very familiar with Daniel 9 because that was written in Babylon. So they knew all this stuff. Yes?
After the hordes left Bethlehem, then there would have been a house available, so they moved from the manger to a house.
Sure. Well, they moved at some point, they moved from a manger to a house. Oh, you know, a lot of people like to put it as a cave, but you don't know. It says house. So I don't know what it is. Oh, the manger? They like to do it as a cave. I don't know. It works well in a story. I don't know.
It's a cave now.
It says manger.
So Kim, they would have seen the star, they would have said, hey, Israel, something happened in Israel in May,
Yeah.
and then they're traveling from May to September. It wasn't until September that Mars slid into the constellation, or like...
It actually isn't until January about 10th of the 6 BC that Mars slides in. So while they're on their journey,
It's a 6 month...
yeah, I think they start walking in September. I don't think they walk
Saw it
immediately.
in May.
They see it first in May and they go, something's happening in Israel. Let's watch this
They chew
more.
on it for 3 months.
Then they chew on it. And then in September they go, we better go see what's going on. So then they put all this journey together. It was a big deal to put a journey together in those days. And so then they head out in September. And while they're getting there, in early January, they see that Mars is coming in. They go, oh man,
That nailed it.
now I know that this symbol of great power is coming into here. It kind of nails it for them. And then they go to Herod, and Herod goes, well, it's in the town of Bethlehem. And the wise men are going, man, it's taken me right to his house because I'm going to the house of David. You know, it's just the whole thing, when you look at it, you go, and does about 6 BC work? Yeah, because that gives them time. If they're already seeing Jesus at a house, it means he was born in about 7. Then they go to Egypt, they come back, Herod dies in 4. The time fits well. Also, it works well with the shepherds because they'd be with their flocks in the spring and the fall. And so that's when they're seeing the star. And that was my goal today, was to totally mess up Christmas for you. So I hope that I have thoroughly and completely ruined it for you. When you go out there and we sing, you know, about, oh, little town of a town of Bethlehem. Yeah, about the star. You know, it's kind of crazy. Yeah, we three kings. I don't like we three kings. Yeah,
Do
yeah.
you have a sense of, I mean, they're from Nazareth. I mean, Joseph he's a carpenter, he's doing his thing in Nazareth, and we're talking months, maybe even a year, that they stay in Bethlehem. Do you have speculation as to why and how?
I think that they had friends that they could stay there with. And I'm not sure that it was very long because once they got word that something was going on, they got off to Egypt. And they were still afraid to go back to Bethlehem when they came back. The Bible tells us that.
And relative to the Magi in this whole,
I think I put the birth probably in September. I mean, we see that there's going to be this power. I mean, and then we see that the birth is happening. It could have been in the spring or it could have been in the
so
fall.
you're thinking 4 or 5 months that they remain in Bethlehem,
Right,
got into a house.
right.
Why
Yeah.
did the Babylonian Magi care what was in the Hebrew Bible?
The Babylonian Magi cared very much because the Jews had such a presence in Babylon. So the Jews, very few of the Jews actually went back after they'd been captured by the Babylonians. A huge number of Jews stayed in Babylonia. And even until, even up to modern times, there was a large Jewish presence in Baghdad. Well, that's something for you to chew on. Again, the example is we conflate things. We don't really read what's in the Bible. There's a possible explanation. Have a Merry Christmas anyway.